Once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampires. It is a host of damned souls of vampires.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Go.
Hi everybody, welcome to Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and as usual with me tonight is my lovely, lovely co-host, Mark Johnson.
Hello. Well, actually it's not so usual. I missed last week.
Didn't you notice one thing there?
And what's that? Besides the fact that you did it perfectly.
Didn't have to do a retake.
No, you did it right on the first take, and you remembered my name. I am fairly impressed.
Oh, I remembered your name because you just, a few seconds before, reminded me. But I actually got through it without having to do it about 10 times. Fantastic, eh?
Which one of these days I'm just going to put together an outtake compilation of all the times that you mess up and, put some music.
Oh, no, you can't do that. The language is too bad.
Put some music behind it and lots of F-bombs in there.
Yeah. Yeah. There certainly is. F-bombs and little buggers.
Well, I'm sorry I missed last week. You guys did a great show, though, talking with Leroy.
Oh, I forgot about that. You weren't around, were you?
No, it was you and Monkey who did the show.
Oh, that's right. Me and Andrew.
Yes.
Yeah.
Andrew Chaplin.
Sorry, people. I'm not going off my trolley. I'm sleep deprived.
Yes. Yeah. So how is your dog Boise doing?
He's on very strong painkillers and anti-inflammatories, but he's doing better than, well, considering we took him to the vet to have him put down on Saturday. And today now, he's just sneaked in the room behind me. He's doing better. Touch wood.
So, obviously he wasn't put down, right?
No. No, but we, I said my goodbyes to him when he left for the vets.
It was that bad.
It was that bad. It was terrible. And he couldn't walk. He couldn't lift him properly. He screamed. But today, yeah, very, very strong painkillers because he's obviously wasn't having a heart attack and he hadn't had a stroke like we thought. He'd done some damage to his spine. He has hip dysplasia, being a German Shepherd. Most German Shepherds, that aren't thoroughbred, or not bred by a breeder, could have hip dysplasia. And he's got hip dysplasia, so damaging his spine with his hips and his arthritis, because he's getting on now, and the fact that he may have twisted his pelvis a little bit. I think he'll be having an MRI. Is it MRI scan?
Yes, MRI.
Yeah, just to see what nerve damage there is. But since he's been on these very, very strong painkillers and, like I said, anti-inflammatories, he's back up on his feet. Even if it's not for very long, he is back up and he's going into the garden.
Fantastic.
That's very, very short periods of time.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to hear that. That means he sounds like he's on the mend, so keep our fingers crossed that he'll be back to his old self soon. Yeah, hopefully, because he's my boy. Yes. Yeah. I know we love our animals. Yeah, we do. And so, I haven't had much sleep, and I've got to say again, my office is not completed, and it won't be completed for a long time. So I am still sharing a bird cage with a parrot and a snoring bald
Was she? English Bulldog. Forgot what she was then.
Gertie the Paranormal Pup.
That's it, yeah. Gertie the Paranormal Pup. And she's snoring on the sofa right near me now. So I apologise for any rude noises in advance. I can tell you it is the dog and it is not you.
Or Herbert the Ghost.
Or Herbert the Ghost. No,
Yes.
It's not Herbert the Ghost. He doesn't make them sort of noises. No, he's quite polite, yeah, very polite. And the parrot's asleep at the moment, so let's hopefully he'll stay that way as well.
Well, before
and
we...
what was your name again?
What's that? My name? Yeah, you said it once. We'll let it go at that.
All right, Mark.
But before we get into the show tonight, we will mention once again that your books are back out in print.
Yeah, they are, and I don't know. God help me, I do not know the names of my bloody books. I don't know the titles. I can't remember, Mark.
Well, that's what you have me for. So you wrote them, then I'll promote them. So we have Irene's 2 novels. We have Psychic Spy Recruitment, and which is the re-release of The Psychic Spy. Just for people, so you don't get confused, it is the same book that was previously released. It's just a slightly different title because we had a stalker that was trying to ruin things on Amazon with bad reviews just out of spite. So, but it's the same great book, and of course you're working on the sequel, Psychic Spy in Paris.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
So snap to it.
So there you go, Scott McCune. I am doing it. I am doing it.
And then also your other book, Where Demons Dwell.
It's Where Demons Dwell now.
Yes, Where Demons Dwell.
Isn't it terrible? You know, I'm the author of these bloody books and I can't even remember their names.
Well, again,
I can't remember the titles.
Well, we'll be putting together some new commercials to be playing between the shows to help promote them. So everybody who you want to buy the books, they are available on Amazon.com in both Kindle and softcover formats. And then we are also working on a brand new re-release of your autobiography, Life Among the Spirits. And that should be coming soon. We've added some brand new material and updated it for the new edition. There's some really mind-bending stuff that's going to be in this one.
Yeah, mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing. I'm still trying to process it.
Mind-blowing stuff in that book, and there's mind-blowing stuff in The Psychic Spy.
Yes. So again, go look them up on Amazon.com and get them on Kindle or softcover. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and we'll get into the show. Now, our guest tonight is actually also a host of one of the shows that we broadcast here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network on Friday nights at 10 p.m. He is an author in his own right with over 50 books to his name.
50? It took me long enough to write blooming 3.
And very much acclaimed novel series, and he also has just come out with his nonfiction book titled Mac Maloney's Haunted Universe. So we want to welcome Mac Maloney to the program. How are you tonight, Mac?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Mac, 50 books.
Right. Yep.
So, you do another few of them, and you'll have as many books as I am old.
Well, it's a lot of typing. That's it.
Oh, I say. 50 books. I tell you what, I take my hat off to you.
Well,
I think that is absolutely brilliant.
Well, a lot of them were, when I first started writing, back in the 80s, to tell you the truth, they were, like pulp novels. So I'd have to write 4 a year. And I did 4 a year for about 5 years. So there's your 20 right there. So, so it was just like banging them out. It was a good way to learn how to write a book, that's for sure.
That is absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, I was going to ask, with that many books, you weren't using the Stephen King writing method like he did back in the 80s, a lot of...
What's that, Mark?
I don't know what you mean. Mark. No,
neither do I. That's a new one with me.
That's what got him in trouble. We're in Massachusetts. We're in the northern part of Massachusetts. We're actually pretty close to Maine, and he at one point was the richest guy in Maine. And talking about taking your hat off to someone, I take my hat off to him because he's so successful. But he ran into, the downfalls of doing a lot of, let's say illegal drugs at the time to help him, just right through the night. I know exactly how it feels, to tell you the truth. Do
you know something, Mac? I wasn't even thinking about that. When he sniffed, I thought, this poor bloke must suffer with colds or hay fever.
Hay fever. But yeah, so that I know that happens, and luckily I've never been able to afford that much of that, and so I'm lucky. But every once in a while, and it's only because it's legal here now in Massachusetts, you have a couple puffs on your banana peel and just go right to work, and I think it has almost the same effect.
Well, and it has great health benefits too.
Right, I need totally educating after this program. I don't understand why you'd be smoking banana peel.
It's for marijuana.
Yeah.
Is it
cannabis?
Oh,
which is legal in many states here now. Yeah, yes.
Wacky backy. I see. Okay. Right.
Well,
I'll have to get some of that. I might write 50 books.
Or you'll fall asleep and eat a Twinkie.
Okay.
You'll just fall asleep, but beforehand eat a whole box of Twinkies. That's
well. See, that's the downside. You're right.
Twinkies. Well,
it's an American. It's an American thing.
What's a Twinkie?
It's like a piece of sponge cake, but
everybody, they're talking about Madeira sponge.
It's like, I think someone took a Twinkie and then they put it out on a roof, they put it on their roof and they left it there for 10 years. And they came back and it was still spongy and edible. So they must be making them out of plastic or something.
That's really frightening. That's really frightening. And I used to love those as a kid.
Even the birds didn't touch it.
No one would not come near it now.
No. It's pretty bad when the ants won't even touch it.
Right, yeah. So they must have polychlorides or something in there,
It sounds like whoever this person is, they cook like me. Yeah.
Hostess, the same ones that made ding-dongs.
Right.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, they own half of foodstuffs in America. They're huge.
Yeah.
Why do you have such funny names for them? What's a ding-dong?
That one's like a chocolate-covered cupcake with cream filling. Same thing, same maker.
Well, ding dong is what a bell makes.
Yes.
Ding dong, and a police car. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong.
And some other naughty bits too. But anyway,
and some other interpretation.
That's a donga, darling. That's a donga. I know what that is.
So, all right, we've gone off on this wild tangent here. But Mac, you're the host of Mac Maloney's Military X-Files. And now, how long have you been doing the show?
Wow. In its present form, about 4 years or so. Mm-hmm. And before that, there was 2 or 3 kind of variations of it. But, now we have like a regular lineup. I hosted with 2 co-hosts, a gentleman named Juan and another guy named Commander Cobra. They're both military veterans. They were both involved in the classified operations, and they know a lot of people. And so through them, we've been able to bring in people who actually work for, the agencies, as they call them here in the United States. And so we have a lot of people like that on the show. And since the 3 of us have been together for about almost 4 years, we've settled on this format, and we like it. We have a lot of fun doing it.
That's some fantastic names. Juan and Commander Cobra.
Right, yeah.
Commander Cobra, that just tells me sex, spies, everything,
really?
Yeah,
I'll pass that on.
That is an absolute turn-on name. Juan reminds me of somebody down at my local Chinese.
No, that's where everyone gets confused. It's Juan, Juan, Juan,
like
as in
Hispanic Juan.
The Spanish.
Oh,
Juan, yeah.
Oh.
He gets upset because people.
That's even sexier.
They send. I'm going to tell both of them that they're going to just flip when they hear that you said that both of their names are sexy. But people write him fan letters and they actually address it to WON Juan, because they think it's I order out at a Chinese restaurant or something, but it's actually JUAN, and he does the forward for the book, for the new book.
So it's Juan.
Juan.
Juan. Oh.
Now, Mac, are you yourself a veteran?
No, I'm not. It's funny because I'm from a military family. My father was in World War II. I had uncles in the Korean War. My brother was in the Vietnam War. But by the time I came up for draft age, let's say, there were college deferments. And, to be truthful with you, the only reason I went to college is because I wanted to dodge the draft. Didn't want to go to Vietnam. So here I am. I would not that I didn't want to go in, and the fact that my brother was in there, they probably would have went easy on me, to tell you the truth, because they didn't want two brothers in Vietnam at the same time, if that was where I was going to go. But I'm just not like the military. I'm not made out to be a military person. Some people can do it. Some people love it. Some people, it's their profession. We have them on the show all the time. But I'm just not cut out for it. I know I'd be in the brig, like in 2 weeks, and it would just end uncomfortably, I think.
Yeah, that's me too. I mean, my father also, he served in the U.S. Marine Corps. He fought in World War II in the Pacific. He was in Okinawa, and he also was in the first year of Korea, the liberation of Seoul, and was at Incheon Reservoir.
Wow! Man, he was at all the hotspots.
Yeah, he was at some hotspots. He has some stories to tell. With my brothers and I, he really discouraged us from going in. I mean, he was always proud of his service, but he did not want us to ever experience what he experienced.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's just funny thing is because, these days we have a regular guest on our show and she is on the trail of people who are guilty of stolen valor. And that's where people go around and they put on medals they didn't earn and stuff like that, So we talk about that a lot. And real heroes, and I've known a few of them, and my father being one of them, they don't talk about war. They do not glamorize war.
No, they don't.
They don't want anyone to go through what
No. Well, my father, he was in the Royal Navy. He was on a destroyer. And he got hit his destroyer went... he was a bit unlucky. I think he ended up in the water about 3 times in his naval life. But... he didn't talk about it very much either. I used to have to really, as a child, push him to get the stories. And as I got older, he pushed me and tried to get me into the RENS, the Women's Royal Navy.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, some people are made out for it, some people aren't,
Yeah.
But anyone who doesn't, in my opinion, anyone who doesn't, I don't care what you do. You could be right on the front lines, or you could be in some supply house somewhere. For people to take, years of their life and devote it to their country, I think, my hat's off to them, really. I mean, they really deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah, well, the armistice. Have you been celebrating the armistice over there?
Yeah, today
100 years.
Today,
Veterans Day.
Well, today is our Veterans Day, which we celebrate every year. But yeah, they had the armistice over there in France.
Right. Yeah.
Ours was on the 11th hour on the 11th of the 11th month. But also, do you know? I've forgotten now. These are air heroes, like you said. They are air heroes, but there are hundreds of unseen heroes. The people that were left behind, the people that drove fire engines, especially in this country, you know?
Yep.
The ambulance drivers that drove through all the bombing to get to people.
Right. Yep.
To try and save them. There were so many. The people that worked in the ammunition factories. So many people, and the women that worked in the fields.
Right.
They all went to helping.
Firemen, policemen,
They should all be recognized for their bravery.
When you're in trouble, you want to see one of these people show up, so they don't get the credit that they deserve, as I said before. And, I grew up in a working class section of Boston called Dorchester, and just about everyone we knew where they're either their father was either a cop or a fireman or worked for the city in some way, and then we look back on 9/11 and there were 300 firemen and 100 cops died that day trying to rescue people. They just don't get the credit they deserve. I don't know. The veterans don't either. I don't know why we forget these people, but we do. It's not right.
No, it's not right.
It's unfortunately, especially now the climate that we're currently living in seems so crazy and hostile. And while I think that we're doing a much better job these days of recognizing veterans, I mean, I know I'm a recruiter in my day job, and we specialize in finding jobs for veterans and working with Veterans Affairs, and for specific jobs. I've worked with military recruiting agencies too, hiring people with those skills.
Right.
And but it was like that time around the Vietnam War where it was so many of those guys were just forgotten, and they came home and they were ignored or spit on, or and just vilified for just trying to do their job.
They were definitely ignored, and people didn't realize, what these guys had gone through. It was just such a different war anyway. Basically, you went over there. If you lived through, 12 months, if you lived through a year, you came home. It didn't make any difference if you won, lost, anything. You're basically just a person on the ground with a rifle. But some of the stuff that happened over there, just stuff that I've read and stuff I know that people have told me, it was like living in hell for a year, and for no reason. Because let's face it, all they had to do was wait 7-8 years, and communism wouldn't have fallen anyway. So really, what was the point of killing 50,000 Americans and about 2 million Vietnamese? For what? It was for nothing. And that just makes it even more. We should be honor these people even more, that they went over there and sacrificed themselves for some kind of a goal that no one could quite see and never have seen. I know, it's just too bad. In Russia, I hate to say this, and I hate to bring them up as an example, but in Russia, if you were in World War II, if you're a veteran, they would give you a special star.
Yeah.
And, you could go to the head of any line to get in the theater, stores.
Yep.
And maybe that's not right either, okay?
But they do treat their veterans as heroes. Sure, they recognize them.
Yep.
Over here we had the Falklands, and then you got the Gulf and everything, and those boys came home and they weren't getting the support that they needed.
Right. Well, there's a thing. Once the war is over, everyone forgets. That's it. That's the problem. That's the problem. And there's a person in our family who is married to a Vietnam vet, and he's had a lot of problems, lots of medical problems that were caused when he was in the service, and in the Veterans Administration, not to get on the soapbox, but they're horrible in this country, in the United States. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Absolutely terrible.
Absolutely terrible is right. And this poor guy, and he and the relative of ours, just barely living on the edge, if you know what I mean. And in the past year, they've cut his food stamp allowance by $1 each time. So he gets $3 less, and it's only like $40. Okay. Yeah. And I say, this is what you're giving a guy who not only, devoted his life for 4 or 5 years to the service, but actually came out, worse for it. And you're cutting his food stamps $1 every few months. I mean, really? Is that how you really want to treat these people? But that's what's happening.
No, it's a joke. It's an absolute blooming joke. Well, anyway, what we'll say to everybody out there, no matter what country you're in, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. And all the different branches, everybody from, the actual military branches to even the intelligence services, everyone who served.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
You got something to say there, Irene?
No.
I didn't think so. So anyway, so Mac, with your books and your show now, Military X-Files, and now you have this new book, Haunted Universe. So tell us a bit about Haunted Universe. How did that come about? And what can people expect when they read it?
Well, it came about because I had most of the 50 books that we've just been talking about are novels. I do a series called Wingman, which is about a post-World War III fighter pilot, Zen fighter pilot type guy, and that's going on now. I'm working on number 19 soon. 19 and 20 will be out in the next couple of years. And so most of the books that I've written are novels, but a few years ago I was having lunch with my editor, and I just happened to say to him, when I was a kid, I used to really be into UFOs, and I've kind of, stayed with it as an adult. But as I mentioned previously, my father was a World War II vet, and he had a lot of history books, military history books around the house. So as a kid, I read a lot of UFO books, but I'd read a lot of his military history books. And for some reason, the connection was that it just seemed like people saw UFOs more frequently during wartime than in peacetime. There was just this idea, and I brought it up to the editor, and he says, that would be a good book, maybe a nonfiction book. Do you want to do it? So I said, yeah, sure. So what happened was I wrote that book, UFOs in Wartime, and then a follow-up book called Beyond Area 51, and I amassed all this research of all these crazy stories that I came upon while I was researching these two books. And then for a while, I worked for TBS. TBS's website, Turner Broadcasting Systems website, called Conspiratorium, where it was just every month they'd have just these 10 to 15 weird stories that I would research. They would pay me to research, and they would basically cut lines for photographs. And so once again, I had started another pile of just very strange stories. I'd set them aside. Finally, I put them in put them in a compilation. Got them all in one place, and that's Mac Maloney's Haunted Universe. There's about 300 very strange stories in this book having to do with ghosts, ghost planes, ghost ships, haunted battlefields, you name it. Everything is in there.
Now, have you yourself ever experienced anything that you consider paranormal?
Usually I say no, but, looking back on it, I have to say yes, a couple things. I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen a ghost. But two things have happened to me. There's an odd phenomenon that other people have reported on, and I'm glad I found that out, where I used to live up in upstate New York for a while. I worked for the General Electric Company, and I would be laying in bed at night in the summer with all the windows open. We're very close to this highway called the Northway. It goes right up from New York City to Montreal. And you could just barely hear the traffic. But you would hear, every once in a while, late at night, you would hear this sound that sounded like a truck in low gear, trying its hardest to get up into the next gear. I mean, if you can imagine that sound.
Yes.
That's the sound, okay? And I would lay there listening to it, and I remember just one night I thought, I've been listening to this thing for about 5 minutes. This guy would be half the way to Montreal by now. Why am I still hearing this, And I would listen, and that's the only way I could describe the sound. So I just remembered that, and then I would come home and visit my family up in the northern part of Massachusetts. Once again, kind of near a highway, not that close, but laying there one night in the summer, windows open, I heard the exact same sound. And I thought, wow, I'm hearing this for so long. This truck would be miles away from me now. So it's not a truck. I don't know what it is. And so I looked into it, and it turns out a lot of times forest rangers hear the same sound. They're out in the middle of the forest, and it sounds like a truck, trying to get itself into the next gear. That's the only way you can describe it. So I've heard that over my lifetime, and over a few times in my lifetime. And then the other thing real quick was right after I got out of college, a bunch of us rented a house during the winter on the beach. And, we all had our own room, and I was in this one room, and I would be falling asleep, and I could hear people talking. And it wasn't in the house, because everyone's, asleep or passed out usually. And but I could hear, it was like I was in a room, like in a bar room, just hearing people talking all the time. And it is funny. It didn't scare me. It didn't even really concern me. But later on, when I thought about it, I used to think, wow, I was in this room that I could hear voices, So two kind of minor things, not as glamorous as seeing a ghost or a UFO, but so those are my brushes with the paranormal.
Yeah, Mac, in this house, you often hear voices. You know, several guests have heard people talking in rooms where there's been no one in those rooms. I've heard it. My husband, Saturday morning, was woken up early. No, Sunday morning. He went to the vet the dog went to the vet Saturday. Sunday morning, my husband was woken up early because he heard two women, or what sounded like two women, downstairs talking. And he came down, and the dog.
Wow.
The dog was wagging his tail and lifting his head.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's unusual, you bring that up with the dog, is we had a show a few weeks ago where we talked about how people called in and talked to us about how sometimes their pets react in an unusual way, you know. And we had this one story where, you know, this kind of retired couple, the dog would sleep at the foot of their bed all the time. And one night the dog got up, went into the kitchen and started barking at something in the corner. You know, he insisted, you know, and the two people were just, you know, frightened beyond, you know, out of their wits, because the dog never acted like this before, but it was like he was barking at something invisible. So we went through that whole thing, and it seems like, and people made the case that, you know, our pets have some kind of, you know, they're able to peer into the paranormal like we're not. Oh,
they are. They definitely are. You know, but like I said, it was because he heard the voices downstairs of these two women. That's why he got up when he did. And he was, you know, he was overjoyed to see the dog wagging its tail and lifting its head up, especially after the day before. So whether there was something down here, you know, one of my ghosts was a physiotherapist. That's the funny thing about it. She was a physiotherapist at the hospital in Cardiff. In her lifetime. Yeah. So it makes me wonder whether, you know, you don't know, do you? You just don't know. I don't really want to think about it. But if they did do something to my dog to make him feel better that day.
Good.
Thank you.
More power to them.
Yeah, thanks, Myra.
Well, speaking with pets, I mean, I don't really have anything happening in my house except the other day, my one dog, Dakota, Rottweiler, he's an old man. He just turned 13. He doesn't move very well. Sweet dog, though. But he was laying down here while I was working on the computer, and all of a sudden he lifts his head, looks at the door to the garage, and starts growling. And he had that pointed head, like, you know, he's pointing at something, like he sensed that something is there. And I asked him, well, what are you growling at? And he wouldn't take his eyes off the door to the garage. So I got up and went, and I checked. There's nothing there. And but he was fixated on it for about 5 minutes before he seemed to calm down, lose interest, and go back to sleep.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's lots of videos on YouTube actually that will show this. You know, pets reacting to something that, you know, it appears that humans can't see, and it's really. I mean, I watch them because I'm fascinated by them, because it's really it's something tangible, if you know what I mean. You know, you're seeing another living animal, you know, react to something that you can't see, but there's something there. There has to be, especially if the dog isn't usually like that. You know how dogs are. They react to people, a stranger in the house, someone outside, or whatever. You know when the dog is kind of on alert. But what's it mean when he's on alert when he's barking at something in the corner and nothing's there? That's kind of close, you know. That's close to what's going on.
I think all animals are psychic. You know, they've all got this psychic ability, because look how many animals know when their owners are returning to the house. My dogs do this every week. My husband travels down from London because he's in London all week. He travels down from London, and as soon as he comes off the bottom of the M4 motorway, those dogs go up in the air. They get excited, and I can ring him at that exact time and say, right, where are you now? And I've done this many a time. We've tested it. Just come off the motorway.
How strange. I mean, they know. Yeah. I mean, just real quick, I'll tell you just kind of a chilling story, a sad story about that. Commander Cobra, one of the co-hosts, he had these two big dogs. They were half German Shepherd and half wolves. Okay, and I know people say that all the time, but I know these dogs, and they were literally half wolves. They were enormous dogs, and their name was Jack and Jill, if you can believe it. He had them for 13 years, and Jill, the female, started to have deteriorating health and so on, and they were bringing her back and forth to the vet, and it looked just like it was a matter of time. So the night before they were going to bring her to the vet to put her down, and you can understand, what they were going through, the agony. Yeah. For the first time in the 13 years they had it, she ran away. She ran away into the woods. They live up in Maine, and they were all night looking for this dog in the woods. It was raining, it was cold, and they finally found her, and basically cleaned her up and brought it to the vet and put it down, and it was just a really bad time for them. But he said to me, she knew. Yeah, she knew. She knew what was going to happen, and she ran away. And I don't know. I think that they're more intelligent than even pet owners give them credit for.
Yeah, I agree. My two Germans are massive. They're up to my hips. They are two of the biggest German. Well, when we first walked in the vet with them, he went, "Oh my God," because he said he'd never seen German Shepherds so big in his life, and. Right.
When the vet goes, "Oh my God," then they're big dogs.
Yeah, and they're brothers, and they've never ever been separated. Never been separated. And when Boise went down with whatever he's done to himself, Denzel just wouldn't leave his side, and he cried. So
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I can remember seeing probably 5 years ago now, there was a gentleman, his name is Noam Chomsky, down here, in the United States. And he was one of these people who can predict what's going to happen 20, 25 years from now. And he predicted then that sometime within the 2020s, late 2020s, we'll be able to communicate with dogs. He says they were working on it, and there's some way that you can kind of get like almost like a language that both sides would understand. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but this guy's track record is about 80% predicting what things are going to be in 2 or 3 decades.
I can believe that, because you've got horse whisperers, you've got dog whisperers.
Right, yeah. So somehow they're going to be able to have the communication go back and forth, and a dog is actually going to be able to tell you, talk to you. So, I can't wait for it to happen. It's going to be interesting when it happens, but...
it will be interesting. In this house with 6 dogs, it's going to be biscuit.
90% of it's going to be feed me, so...
Yeah. Can I have that sausage? But that would be interesting to find out. I hope I'm still around to see that. I really do. Sure. So, now... what I want to hear is now I know some things about military ghosts on old airports and things like that. Okay. World War II airports. There was one in Croydon, in London, South London, and they often it's been built on. It's a housing estate, but they often hear this old World War II motorcycle going through at night. Right. And quite often they've seen apparitions of airmen and things like that.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in the UK.
Hell of a lot of it.
There's Spitfires. We have a story in the book about a Spitfire that shows up over this, what was an auxiliary base during World War II. Yeah. And, people see it. They see it close enough to read the numbers off the wings, But there's only, I think there's something like 43 Spitfires still left. Spitfire was like the fighter that won the Battle of Britain back in the early part of World War II, and there's only they're like preserved now, and a lot of them are in museums. I think there are 44 still flying, and this one isn't one of the 44. So
there's only a few of them left.
Right. Yeah. So what people see has to be some kind of a ghost airplane.
Yeah, I've actually seen them at these. What are they called? When they have all the aeroplanes up in the air, these kind of shows, air shows. I've actually seen the Spitfires. They're fantastic to watch.
Right.
And the noise is like nothing else.
Well, you can hear them.
Like no other aircraft. You can tell a Spitfire when it's coming.
That's a Rolls-Royce engine. I mean, it's a Rolls-Royce coming, basically, But they were a fantastic airplane. The Hurricane was also a fantastic airplane. And if not for those airplanes, and of course the guys flying them, might have been a different outcome,
Yeah. What about passenger planes? Do you think, like I think, that a lot of these passenger planes, every now and then they may use a part from a crashed plane?
Well, yeah. Once again, we have that story in the book about this. In the United States, there was an airline. It's not around anymore, but it's called Eastern Airlines. It was pretty big, but it was bought by someone. And in the early 70s, 72, I think, there was an airplane, there was a flight. It kind of got a lot of publicity here, crashed down in the Florida Everglades.
Yeah.
And it killed 100 people, including the pilot and the flight engineer. Now, what they did was, and this is unbelievable, now we found out later on this is common practice with the airlines in the United States, is some people survived, 100 people were killed. They actually took the wreckage out of the Everglades and then salvaged the parts and put them on other Eastern airliners. And right away, people started seeing the pilot and the flight engineer. Now, these are people, Eastern airline employees, who knew these people, who worked with them. And they would see them. They would see them at the other end of the plane getting coffee. They would see them in the cockpit, and then they weren't there. I mean, it had happened so many times that Eastern Airlines, where they denied that this whole idea that they've haunted their entire fleet. They said their quote was this total garbage. They went back to every plane, took back all the salvage parts and got rid of them, and replaced them with new parts, and the problem went away. Now, that's a very strange story because, as I say, the people who saw these apparitions in the airplanes that had the salvaged equipment knew these people. They knew them. Very strange ghost plane story.
Oh.
One of the, I remember back in, I think it happened back in the 70s. Wasn't there was a famous, was it Pan Am or TWA, where there was a plane that went down, and then later on, one of the planes was haunted by the pilot.
Well, this is it. Yeah, Flight 401. Yeah. Eastern Flight 401. That's what it is.
That was it. Okay.
That was it. But just think about that.
Sorry, Mac. Did they make a film on that?
Yes. Yep. There's been several books, and there's a story out there that the pilots actually got together with and had a seance and said to the pilot and the flight engineer that people were seeing the apparitions of, okay, now you can rest, so on and so forth. I don't really believe that. But what is true, what is documented, and once again, I can't believe this is what airlines would do, but they did salvage the parts from the crashed airliner and put them on other planes. And, after so many people saw these ghosts, these apparitions, they stopped that procedure. And then just a few years later, Eastern Airlines went out of business. Yeah. So what a strange thing. But, yeah, that's a really well-documented haunting.
Wow. I'll have to read that again. I haven't read it. I've seen the film. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I've seen the film.
If you want to hear a really creepy ghost plane story, once again in the book, back in the early 90s, there's a place in California called John Wayne Airport. Believe it or not, it's in Orange County. It's in a very high-priced neighborhood. A lot of celebrities live near John Wayne Airport, and they have their private planes there. So. It's so hoity-toity that you can't take off before 8 a.m. and you can't land after 8 p.m. because of noise restrictions. And if you do, you get fined. So, and especially on the weekend. So on this one particular day in June of 1993, on a Sunday, one of these small racing-type airplanes show up over the airport. And they call them midget races. They're all engine, and just like a little bubble for the cockpit, and they make a lot of noise. It shows up over the John Wayne Airport, starts doing aerobatics over the airport before 8 p.m. on a Sunday morning, waking a lot of people up. So many people were attracted by it and saw it, and it was flying so low they were able to take down the number on the side of the plane.
Yeah.
They reported that number, and that automatically generates a noise complaint that's automatically sent through the computer to the owner, which is what happened. But it was sent to a gentleman named Deke Slayton, who owned an airplane, midget airplane. He was one of the original Mercury 7
Yeah, I was going to say, that name sounded very familiar, yes.
One of the first Mercury astronauts. He lived in Houston. He died 3 hours before people saw this plane.
Wow.
And then they went to the guy who owned Deke Slayton's midget racer with the same numbers on it, and he signed a affidavit saying that since I bought this plane from Deke 10 years ago, it's been in a museum. It has not moved. Yet dozens of people saw this plane over John Wayne Airport that day, 3 hours after Deke Slayton died. He loved the airplane. He used to fly it all the time. So many people saw it that they were actually take down the actual numbers that issued this complaint that wound up on his wife's computer like 3 or 4 hours after Deke Slayton died at home. How do you explain that?
You can't, can you? You can't. But it must have been very upsetting for her.
For her, but she said actually in a way she thought it was, him like flying up to heaven,
a message. Yeah.
Yeah. But it happened and dozens of people saw it.
Oh, that's crazy. That is absolutely crazy.
See, it's stories like that just reminds me of one of my favorite sayings, is that when I die, hopefully I die peacefully in my sleep like my grandfather, not screaming in terror like his passengers.
Have you got any car ones? Because I've seen cars going up the motorway at the wrong direction.
No one in them.
No, I saw a hearse.
Oh.
A hearse travelling in what would be the it was coming down what would have been the upside of the motorway, and it was in the dead of night. There was no other cars on that side of the road, and I saw it, and then it just disappeared.
We have a story in there about this road. I believe it's in Mississippi, where it was let's say a fairly new road, fairly paved recently, let's say, in the past 20 years. Went through the woods there, but the local authorities kind of suddenly shut it down, and now it's blocked off. People can't drive down this road, and the reason is that people were going there and doing it late at night, and they report people smearing things on the outside of the window, seeing faces up against the window, rocking the car, and before people could get away. And there was just so many reports of this, kind of this haunted road that, as I said, local officials, finally shut it down. So, kids are doing it as a goof and getting the heck scare out of them. So they just finally decided the best thing to do is just close down the road. So that's the closest we came to a haunted car.
I've seen also on the M4 a motorbike that wasn't there, driving up very, very close to our car.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't there. That just disappeared as well. And that was when I saw these ones, the car ones, because I've seen several. We were driving down from Scotland once down the motorway, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was two lights right up our backside, like there was a car bumper to bumper sort of thing right behind us.
Wow!
And my husband started swearing and cursing. I'll open up the bloody boot in a minute and let him in, sort of thing, the boot trunk to you lot. And I got up, took my belt off, turned around and looked, and there was nothing there. But I saw it in the wing mirror, my side of the car.
Wow, that's too creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff like that would freak me out, frankly.
There was no way this car could have gone. It had past us, but it didn't. So there's lots of strange things happen over here, though. You just get used to it, take no notice in the end.
Well, we did a big chapter in Beyond Area 51, and also there's a lot of stories in the this book, Haunted Universe, having to do with the UK because, for whatever reason, there just seems to be a lot of paranormal activity there. There's an old radio up in Scotland at an old RAF base. You've probably heard of it, where people can actually hear Winston Churchill's speeches coming over the radio when it's unplugged. And people, engineers have pulled this thing apart. They can't figure it out, but people can hear World War II broadcasts on it. There's a lot of haunted kind of airfield stuff. People seeing airplanes, flying by, these World War II airplanes. Lots of people see them, but as we were saying earlier, every World War II airplane these days that's left flying, people know where it is. They're keeping tabs on it, and no one knows where these airplanes come from or where they go. So the UK is really haunted. I think it's because people have lived, civilization has been there for a long time, and I don't know what, but
Mac, you can put your arm outstretched and you're touching a ghost.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's what it's like here. I tell you, it is absolutely teeming with paranormal activity. So, and UFOs.
And UFOs, yeah. Well, Scotland, once again, just going back to
Bonnie Bridge.
Yeah, Bonnie Bridge is the place people see more UFOs there than any other place in the United States. And what's interesting too in that area is that you among many other things, you have Rosslyn Chapel, which is the chapel that was built by the guy who 100 years later, but he has some kind of connection to the Knights Templar. And you go into Rosslyn Chapel and you see all these things that shouldn't be there, like the DNA strand. They have corn carved into the side, on the pillars, and no one had known what corn is for the next, for 200 years. I mean, this was built in the 1400s, and corn came from North America. So how would the people building a chapel in the 1400s in Scotland know about corn? We don't know. There's a lot of Templar connections to that place. It's also very close to a place where people see lots of UFOs, and also we found out in the research is, maybe you know this, I don't know, but more people in the Rosslyn area win like the national lottery than any other place in the UK. Ever hear that?
Yeah.
So think about that.
I'm thinking of moving there, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'd move there. More UFOs have this really weird Knights Templar connection, and people win the lottery there more than anywhere else. Yeah. I mean, someone's trying to tell us something about this place.
My auntie, during the war, she was a little girl, and she was sent to Bonnie Bridge to, when they evacuated all the children out of the cities and everything. Bonnie Bridge is where she went and stayed with a family in Bonnie Bridge. So we took her back there about 10, 15 years ago. It had been the first time she went back to Bonnie Bridge since the war, since she left as a child. And it's just an amazing place. It really is. It's stuck out in the middle of nowhere.
Out in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah, and when you first see it, you think, there's some sort of silly little town. But, but it's just got that feeling about it. There's something there.
Even going back during the Roman years, there's a story. They made a movie about it, how there was a Roman legion, 1,000 guys just disappeared, right up in the Bonnie Bridge area, the Rosslyn area, where they would be in contact. They were at the far reaches of the Roman Empire. And, all of a sudden they were gone, and they would send people out looking, where did these guys go? But they couldn't find them. 1,000 people gone. And we end the chapter with Mary, the Queen of Scots. She actually said, I've seen all the strangest things of my life because I've been to Rosslyn.
Yeah.
Strange place.
It is a strange place. You can feel it. You can feel something is not quite right there. It's a bit out of sync.
Right, sure.
Yeah. But I live in Wales.
Okay.
This house is actually in Wales, in the Grandareth Valley, and Mark, I tell you, it's UFO highway across here. But I've got the Brecon Beacons not far from here as well. And
there's a lot of UFO activity in Wales, I mean, a lot of strange things have gone on in Wales. There's a story years ago where they thought, where some British military attachment, we have this in beyond Area 51, where this British military attachment was put on the trucks. They went up to Wales. They didn't tell them what it was for, but the word went around is that something crashed up there and they had to secure the area, and they did it. And then there's all kinds of stories about, whatever crashed, they put it in boxes and they brought it here and there and everywhere. But then about a year later, maybe, the BBC put on a show about what would you really do if a UFO crashed in Britain. And anyone who was paying attention realizes the example they were telling you was this example of the British movement going up to Wales and carting this thing back into Britain somehow. They retraced what actually happened. And a lot of people thought, wow, are they setting us up for something? Is this their way of preparing us for something in the same manner as last December, almost a year ago, the U.S. Navy released a video of F-18 pilots over the Pacific seeing the Tic Tac UFO, as everyone calls it.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah.
And they have it on their recorders. They have it, you have the voice of these two guys looking at this. And when they released that, once again, about a year ago, a lot of people, we had people on our show, and they just said, people who work for the U.S. government, for the agencies, for the Army, and they say, this is the way. This is how you set the table to get people to learn something about life in outer space, or people, some other entities visiting this planet.
Yeah.
You just let it drip out every a little bit every year or so to get people ready for it. And these are people who work for them. So who knows what's going to happen? That Tic Tac video is really compelling in a lot of reasons, a lot of ways. And the first question is, why would they re-release it now?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, Mac, one of your other nonfiction books that you did before this one was about, was it Area 51?
It was called Beyond Area 51, and the genesis of that is that anytime you sign a book contract, the publisher has the right of first refusal on your next book. So basically, you have to give them an idea for your next book.
Right.
And so I had always had this idea, you hear so much about Area 51. It's the most famous, well-known secret base in the world, right? But there are other places around the world that are like Area 51, but are not as out there in the public eye. So we did a book on places around the world like Area 51, everything except Area 51. And it turns out there's lots of places, in England, in Russia, Australia, certainly China and Japan. So it was an interesting way to kind of go through, and in this country too. I mean, there were places. There's a place about 75 miles north of Area 51 in the Nevada desert called Tonopah Airfield. And the stuff goes on there that might not be extraterrestrial, paranormal, but very, very strange stuff goes on there. It's way more secret and way less known than Area 51. So we go to places like that and just kind of give people a thumbnail of what is going on there, what we think is going on there.
Mac, this Tonopah place, has that got an area number?
No. I mean, some people, I've seen it, some people refer to it as Area 52, but really all Area 51 is that the Atomic Energy Commission years ago, after World War II, they declared, just hundreds, thousands of square miles of the Nevada desert as a government testing site where they would detonate nuclear weapons. And when the CIA, the new CIA back then, determined that they needed an air base somewhere away from the public eye to test secret aircraft, they had a map, an Atomic Energy Commission map, and it was all broken up into areas, and they said, we'll take this one, Area 51, because it was near an old salt bed lake that they could use as a runway, a very long runway. That's how Area 51 got its name, Groom Lake. But Tonopah has been called Area 52. That isn't any kind of an official name, but it's a very strange place. It's where they had the stealth. Just to give you an example of how classified this place is. The stealth fighter, the F-117, flew there for 10 years and no one knew about it. The Air Force, the people who put it together in the Air Force and the president knew about it. And for the F-117 back then, and this is now we're talking about in the 70s, for it to leave the airspace, for it to leave Nevada airspace, you needed a presidential authorization for it to go into California airspace if they were doing something that it required a longer flight. That's how classified Tonopah is. And the interesting thing, too, is about this book is that every other place that we mention in the book has some kind of a UFO history to it. There's some kind of UFO history to these secret bases where you have to say what came first, the UFO or the secret base. Everywhere except Tonopah. There is no UFO history at all in Tonopah. And to me, that also tells you something, too. I don't know. Maybe the UFOs stay away from the place, but I don't know what the explanation is. But no one sees UFOs around Tonopah. People see lots of UFOs around Area 51.
But, I get the impression sometimes... I'm sorry, Irene, let me just say this real quick. That, Area 51, because it is now so much in the public awareness, I think it's almost like Roswell. I feel like the government and the military allows us, even though they say, oh, nothing's there, or it's just a regular air base, it's a secret, whatever, they still use it, and they still provide this air of mystique around it to distract the public, to focus their attention on those locations. And maybe they'll put up some of their secret craft that look like UFOs, and people say, see they're still doing stuff here, when in reality it's a bait and switch. It's a distraction from what's really going on at some of these other locations around the country.
Well, Commander Cobra, the one of our co-hosts, I mean, that's his thing, because he's involved in these things. We did a show about a year ago where he called in and he was on his way to Dugway Proving Grounds, which was in Utah, which all kinds of crazy stuff happens there. And he's there and he knows it. He doesn't tell, he can't really tell us exactly what, he's doing, but he has told us that Dugway Proving Grounds is a place where even more crazy things happen than at Area 51. And I agree with you. Area 51 is a place where they test secret aircraft. That's what they do there. We know people who've been there. There's no UFOs. There's no aliens there. There's none of that there. I don't believe the U.S. government has anything even remotely like that. But what they do at Area 51 is that they test secret aircraft. And this whole idea about S2, which is supposed to be this other secret base about 40 or 50 miles.
S2.
S2, right, or S4, which is they claim in Papoose Mountain, about 45 miles south of Area 51, where some people who were former employees of Area 51 says the U.S. has UFOs hidden in the mountain there. If you look into those stories, a good case can be made that the people at Area 51, the intelligence people at Area 51, put out this story, a false story, so Russian satellites would change their direction and that they would start photographing what was going on at Papoose Mountain and not photograph Area 51 as much, because the people at Area 51, they know when they're testing a secret aircraft, they know when Russian satellites are going over. They know when Chinese satellites are going over. And what they have to do is they have to put the airplane that they're testing in the hangar and wait for the satellite to go over. It might take an hour or so to do this. You can schlep this thing back and forth. Well, if you're able to distract the Russian satellites every couple days, basically you don't have to push the airplane back into the hangar and lose an hour or so. And so that was the thing. S4, I think it is the name of the place, where there's been all kinds of crazy stories about there's aliens there, dead bodies. Dick Cheney ran the place. There's 14 levels. We have all of these broken UFOs there and so on and so forth. Lots of evidence that this is created by the American U.S. intelligence agencies to just distract the Russians. Just as Area 51 is meant to kind of distract us.
So the Russians just changed the coordinates for the satellites.
Every couple days, yeah. And the guy, they just got sick of pushing the airplane back and forth in the hangar. I mean, it's as simple as that.
I don't blame them. What was that area that I saw, Mark?
Oh.
What was the name?
It might have been that Area 52 that we had looked in a while back. But, that was a while back. I really honestly don't remember.
All I know, they were shifting stuff from one area into this new area, or what I thought was a new area.
Mm-hmm. And they floated stories a few years ago that they were moving out of Area 51 because the ground was contaminated with, hazardous materials and everything. Once again, it was just a deflection story. A lot of that stuff, a lot of the stuff, well, actually, Edwards Air Force Base is like where they openly test all of our secret aircraft once they've kind of passed muster, let's say. Edwards Air Force Base is technically part of Area 51. Luke Air Force Base, which is in Arizona, technically part of Area 51. Luke Air Force Base, who knows where that is, but everyone knows where Area 51 is. You should have, I'll suggest, having Commander Cobra some night on as one of your guests, and he will tell you all about how the U.S. government uses disinformation and distraction and misdirection to get us looking in another direction, because he's taken part in some of these, projects.
Absolutely. Growing up in the San Fernando Valley, north of Los Angeles, I was only about an hour from outside of Edwards Air Force Base. And I just remember all the testing that they were doing back in the 60s and 70s. There were sonic booms all the time of all the aircraft that they were testing. And then, of course, I found it to be, an extreme, privilege to be there for the first space shuttle landing. When Columbia came down, and I've told the story before, but, you want to talk about it's an incredible event. 250,000 people out there. We camped out the night before to be ready for the next day. So we were right on the front line and watching this thing coming in, and how they timed the Star Spangled Banner to start playing as it was coming in, and the T-38s are mirroring it, guiding it in. And, when it touched down safely, everybody going nuts. And, it was just a really wild experience.
Sure. I wish I was there, man. I would love to have seen that. This is another thing. And once again, a lot of times I'm accused of being the bucket of cold water, but I just want to, give you my thoughts on this. Okay. We hear people all the time saying that, as a result of a UFO crash in Roswell, we reversed engineered stuff. We have anti-gravity devices. We have our own UFOs. We have our own Space Force, not the Space Force that, the current resident in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is talking about. I'm talking about people who've been talking about we've had a Space Force, secret Space Force for the last 20 years. And we really have we have rocket ships, spacecraft going to all the different planets, and it's all a big secret. I don't believe any of that, because the space shuttle, it was the most complicated machine ever created by man. Okay, but basically it was launching a dump truck into orbit. That's what it was. And it took a lot of power, and it took a lot of energy and money and research, the works, to try to get that thing up into orbit. And I say to people, do you really think that the U.S. government would, have this conspiracy where they would go through the motions of launching a dump truck into orbit, and yet on the other hand, they have the secret of, anti-gravity, and we have spacecraft going all over the solar system? It just doesn't compute. Government doesn't work that way. And also these days, you cannot keep a secret. You cannot keep it secret. Even the guys who whacked bin Laden, who had sworn to keep everything secret till the day they die, they've written books, you can't keep a secret these days. If there was some kind of extraterrestrial re-engineered stuff or some kind of Space Force, someone would blab. Someone would go to 60 Minutes, they give them $1 million, you tell us everything. You never hear of it. So I don't believe, once again, the bucket of cold water. I don't think the United States military knows any more about UFOs than we do. They know they exist. They have more evidence that they exist, but they don't know where they're from. They don't know if they're extraterrestrial travelers, time travelers, who knows? I just don't think that they know any more than we do.
Well,
did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be said. I mean, going back and forth, because the different stories that, and we've interviewed a lot of people over the years too. Different stories that refute that a bit. But you know what? There's no proof for any of it that's out there. I mean, you say nobody's come forward. Well, you do have a Bob Lazar who came forward to George Knapp.
Well, he was the guy, but he's the plant. He's the guy who started the whole S4 thing.
Right.
And it turns out, if you really look into, what he's been up to, And that's where really Area 51 got on the map, because all of a sudden he started talking to people at the local TV station in Vegas. And, suddenly he's on the lecture circuit. He's, over in Japan, so on and so forth. But I know people who were with him during those times. And they said that anytime that he did any kind of an interview, there'd be these two guys there, who knows who they were. And they were always making sure, they were acting almost like as attorneys. And they were making sure that every answer he gave, fit a certain mold. And then just up until a couple of years ago, what he does now is he has his own little business and he sells parts to the Defense Department. And he has a nice little business in Chicago somewhere doing it, Illinois. I mean, really, would the Defense Department deal with a guy who made as many outrageous, accusations as Bob Lazar did? There's a lot of evidence that he was just like this inside guy. He was like this misdirection guy. And
again, it's a great diversion to focus all the attention on Area 51 while people are looking away from other locations around the country. Like one of the secret bases that most fascinates me is the Dulce base, Dulce, New Mexico. There's very little we know about that base, and yet the tales, or the rumor mill, I should say, about it have been talking about it for years. And you have underneath the Denver airport, all the miles of tunnels, everything under there, and there seems to be a big military connection.
Right. With Dulce base, once again, I know I'm the guy who, no one wants at the party, but basically what happened is that there was a Kirkland Air Force Base is this enormous base in New Mexico, and there's a lot of people who have offices, outside the base that, bring their services to the base. And some of them are communications people, physicists, you name it. And there's this one guy, he was a physicist. He used to work with the people at Kirkland. And on his own, he found out that, there were communications signals going on over Kirkland Air Force Base that he could not track down to coming from the U.S. military. And they had, at the time, they had a lot of nuclear weapons stored at Kirkland, and they were also doing the first flight test of the F-117 coming out of Tonopah. So he went to the military, to the Air Force, and he said, I think someone is looking in on nuclear storage facilities, and they're looking in on the F-117 test flights because I have these communications. And what they did was they fed that guy so much misdirection information that they made up the story about Dulce Mountain, that there's 50,000 aliens living in there and that they're creating octopus men and all this kind of stuff. So much so that this guy believed it to the point where he wound up going into a mental asylum and then finally dying. And it was really just something that was cooked up by the local intelligence people at Kirkland Air Force Base. And they're the ones who came up with this whole idea of Dulce Mountain. So that guy would go out and he would, give speeches to different UFO groups. And he said, this is what happened. I got this from the U.S. Air Force. But basically what they were doing was they were protecting, in their own way, they were protecting these nuclear storage sites. And also they didn't want anyone to know that we were testing the stealth fighter. That is something that's documented. We go into it in great detail in Beyond Area 51. It's an interest. It's a story an instance where the U.S. government literally killed somebody to divert them from what was going on. And there wasn't anything UFO related or paranormal. It was just that there are nuclear storage sites there. We didn't want the Russians to know that they were there or how many were there. And we didn't want any adversaries to know the F-17 was being tested down there. That's where the Dulce Mountain story began. And I would love it if there were 50,000 aliens living in a mesa somewhere in New Mexico. I think it'd be interesting, but it's not true.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you this. Then that just sets the table for the other side of the coin, which is Roswell. So Roswell's been on the map now for about, 20 years, 20, 30 years now that it's been in the public consciousness. Right. So many different big name investigators have tried tackling it. There's all these stories. But from your perspective, what have you learned about it?
Well, nothing happened there. Once again, I'm the guy who you don't want to invite to your party. Nothing happened there, and I'll tell you why. Number one, what in the Air Force, they don't think these things out. All right, and I'm not giving them any credit because When that happened, people have to remember 2 weeks before, Kenneth Arnold saw the first what we call flying saucers over the state of Washington. He's the guy, his sighting led to the media coining the term flying saucers. Right? Now, once that hit the paper, that was the first real UFO/flying saucer, strange things in the sky media story. And in those 2 weeks, people started seeing UFOs all over the country, hundreds and hundreds. And we have in beyond Area 51, people reporting all in really good, solid sightings, okay, where dozens of people saw flying saucers and so on. It was suddenly in our consciousness. 2 weeks after that, we have this Roswell thing. But what is definitely going on in that area is that you have this secret program where we are launching balloons over the Soviet Union, who at the time was still officially, technically our ally, with acoustic devices to see if we could detect nuclear explosions. Okay. Okay. So you do have this secret project happening there in that area, and oddly enough, the people launching the balloons were General Mills, the same people who make Cheerios. Why, I don't know, but that was happening. So you have all this debris that winds up on that guy's farm, Brazel's farm. Do you know that part of the debris they found rope? Would there really be rope on a UFO? And this whole idea where people have written books, as you say, a lot of researchers have looked into it, sure. But, there are books out there that are saying dozens of people were killed by the military, 50 UFOs crashed there. It's just a way for these researchers basically to write books. I know what it's like. I go and I pitch these things myself, not as far out as that. But I think a lot of people have made money, have written books, have, gone on the lecture circuit, talking about things that they have just basically made up about Roswell. Because, once again, I don't think there'd be rope on the UFO. I don't think that, and I think that the Air Force bumbling, they said, look, we got to put out a cover story because, one of our secret balloons have crashed. UFOs are all, the flavor of the month here, the flavor of the past 2 weeks. Let's blame it on the UFO. And that's what I think happened. I just don't think anything extraterrestrial or anything happened at Roswell. Now, real quick, I will add on to that in UFOs in Wartime, the first nonfiction book I did about UFOs. Okay. Does that mean our time is up?
No, it's okay. Barrett. I'm going to cook him in the oven if he keeps on.
That when they started putting ICBMs in the middle of the U.S. In the early 60s, mid-60s and the 70s, they built this one base where they were, digging the silos in the middle of in the ground, out in the middle of nowhere. And so many UFOs showed up at this particular ICBM base that the Air Force guards refused to go out at night on guard duty because they were just frightened of these things showing up. There was many, many instances where UFOs would show up and Air Force fighters would be scrambled. They would come over this ICBM base. The UFOs would take off. The fighters would leave. The UFOs would come back. It went on for 2 years during the construction of this thing and when they put the missiles in. It was probably the most haunted ICBM base ever. And there's a lot of stories about that, what happened in the 70s with ICBM bases. But the strange thing is that base is in Roswell. That's the story that we should be concentrated on, the UFO's connection to Roswell, because they're all over this ICBM base. This whole idea that a UFO crashed there and that the military got involved and they were threatening people and people saw bodies and so on and so forth. It's all, as you said, Mark, it's been in our consciousness for 30 years. Okay, it happened in 1947. When I was a kid, I used to read all kinds of UFO books, Major Keyhoe's books and people like that. Roswell is never mentioned in any of those books. It's just that Stan Freeman and a lot of other people brought it to some other people brought it to the attention of the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer ran a story, and all of a sudden Roswell is the hotspot. Now it's like they got a museum, which is fine. They've made movies. They had a TV show. They even had a cartoon series about Roswell. It's once again, it's not quite intentional misdirection. it's unintentional misdirection and it started with Stan Freeman going to the National Enquirer, and then boom. I would love to think that a UFO crashed in Roswell. In fact, in the 90s or in the late 80s, I volunteered to go. There was a UFO magazine that was going to go down there with an archaeological team, and everyone was going to go, and we were going to dig up the ground to look for artifacts of the UFO. All you'd have to do is find one that wasn't made on Earth, that wasn't of Earth, and it proves the whole thing is true. That's how much I was into Roswell. But in the past 10 years or so, I just realized, you look at the evidence, nothing happened there. But something definitely happened at the ICBM base very close by.
Mac, did you ever look into Rendlesham?
Yes.
What did you think of that?
We've done a number of shows. That now, once again, you can invite me to your party because I believe something happened there because we have Major Halt is out there. He's with a tape recorder. That's one of our best UFO sightings ever because he's out in the woods in Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah.
Where people thought they saw a UFO crash. He's out there with a tape recorder and he's actually recording what he is seeing, and he is seeing something that is nothing we've ever seen, whether it's of this earth or not, who knows. But something very, very strange happened out there. Now, once again, I don't believe that there's underground bases there with aliens in it. I don't believe that, all this kind of crazy stuff that people have written books about and so on, kind of adding on to this story. But what is definitely in evidence for sure is that they had two UFO sightings. On the second night, Major Halt went out there with a bunch of people with a tape recorder, and he records what he sees. And what he sees, as they say, is not something that, we would normally see. Yeah. Something happened, and then the U.S. military, and they were keeping nuclear weapons there against treaties. They were secretly keeping nuclear weapons there. They weren't supposed to keep them in the UK. There's an NSA listening station.
They were keeping them there because and all the anti-bomb people, these women and everything, all camped out at a completely different place.
Yeah, the Eurodoom, they used to call it the Eurodoom years, but. There's an NSA listening station close by there. There's a lot of stuff going on in that part of the UK. Something happened. Right. Those guys saw it. I know that it turned out bad for some of them in their lives. I know a lot of books have been written about it. Something happened.
There was the people that actually saw it were listed, weren't they?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
So there is this list of who attended it.
And there's this recording, where Major Halt made this recording, and just listen to him. There's no way he's faking it.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting, because there's a lot of to do about that over here at the moment.
Well,
I do know that there is a list of people that were in attendance at that time.
Right, and just the whole way it happened. I mean, it was over the Christmas holidays. A lot of people were on leave, so there weren't that many people at that particular base at the time. And they saw the first, quote unquote crash. And the quote is that people were looking in the forest. They said it looked like a big Christmas tree lit up. It was all these kind of different colors, So they go out there, they can't find anything. Then 2 nights later, not the next night, but 2 nights later, they get another report. And the guy who is the head of the base, he's at a Christmas party. So he calls over Major Halt, who is, one of his staff officers or whatever. And he says, you go out and look. And he brings a tape recorder. And later on, Major Halt said, I'm the guy who, if anything, I'm the guy who debunks these things.
Yeah.
I'm the guy they come to. But I saw what I saw, and you can hear me talking about it. So something happened there.
Yeah, he's recently been over talking about it again over here at a conference that's that our friend put on. So yeah, it was interesting. And like I say, there's a lot of arguments going on about it over here at the moment. But it's I should imagine, easily with the right connections to find out exactly what happened there.
Well, something did.
Yeah. What about the Brecon beacons behind me? Now, they reckon that there's all underground places, UFOs in the hills and one thing or another, because you do see a lot of activity around here. So,
I mean, I would love to believe that, but there's just no evidence of it. I mean, people want to say, we reversed engineered a UFO, and that's how we got microcircuits. That's how we got, Kevlar, all this stuff. Well, what you're doing is you're disrespecting the humans who invented that stuff. I mean, you have to give props to human beings for inventing stuff like that. You can't pass it off as re-engineered UFO extraterrestrial stuff. If you had a UFO and you were able to re-engineer it, once again, you wouldn't go launching the space shuttle into orbit. You'd be flying around out there, as much as we wanted, because we would have the secret. Yeah. As much as a secret that you had horse and buggies, suddenly you had airplanes, suddenly you had automobiles and airplanes. That's how much in advance it would be, and we just wouldn't be putting up this facade that we have to spend all this time and energy and money to get into orbit. I mean, look at us now. Look, astronauts that go to the ISS now. We have to go up in Russian spaceships. One of them crashed the other day. Would we go through all that if we had technology from a reverse UFO?
No, you're right.
My only argument to that would be is if we're talking about the same types of government agencies all being on the same page. And, there's a lot of talk about whatever you want to call it, the shadow government, secret government, or black ops programs that are so black ops that the other agencies aren't aware of them, and even sometimes the president and some of Congress is not aware of them.
Right.
You have, our friend of ours, Bruce Pearson, he was telling this story, and he actually, when he was co-hosting with me on my old show, Unknown Origins Radio, and he had done a guest spot on Coast to Coast talking about a story his father told him before he died back in the 80s about hopping a helicopter ride with a fellow pilot trying to get up in Alaska, was getting a ride out towards Anchorage. And they had to make a stop, and the pilot told him, just stay in your seat, don't say a word, you're not supposed to be here on this, just play it cool. And they had to unload these crates, and when they got to this location, it was just a fenced-in area with nothing else, and these guys in fatigues that were all black with no insignia come up and pull the stuff off the chopper real quick, and then they take off. And later the pilot tells him that supposedly there's talk of an underground pyramid that was found there that's generating this power, and that's something that not a lot of people have ever known about.
Well, I'd love to believe that, I really would, but the chances are is, if the germ of the story is true, and that stuff happens all the time, but you're in a helicopter, you deliver stuff to secret places. Whether there's a pyramid underneath there or not, I don't know. But I go back to this whole idea is that these days, just the way we are, and with social media and people writing books and seeing, dollar signs, if they could write a book, make a movie, make a TV show, you cannot keep a secret these days. You just can't. If you're sitting on a secret that's worth $1 million to you, your family, you're going to be on easy street for the rest of your life, you don't sit on it anymore. You go and you tell people. And I think that somewhere along the line, someone would say, hey, I worked on that underground pyramid, wherever that happened. I just got to go back to, UFOs in one time. We do in Haunted Universe, we do this small chapter about these 3 events that happened. In 1909, people over the UK started seeing these things called scare ships. They looked like German Zeppelins, but they would travel about 300 miles an hour. They were much bigger than German Zeppelins. And in 1909, Germans they didn't have the technology to fly a Zeppelin over the UK and back to Germany again. Yet hundreds of people saw these things. Thousands of people saw them. They were in the newspapers and so on and so forth. Then they went away. No one ever had an explanation for it. In 1931, in the upper part of Sweden, they had this thing called ghost flyers. For about a year, people would see these enormous airplanes, 8 engines, pontoons on them, twin tail. Way beyond the technology of the time, where airplanes were they're not even metal yet. They're still made of cloth. People seeing these enormous airplanes over the very remote parts of Sweden, circling mountains, following railroad tracks, flying in blizzards, and then suddenly they go away. In 1946, the ghost rockets, once again in Sweden, people saw hundreds of rockets flying, over Copenhagen, over all of Scandinavia, as it turned out. It was so bad that the Swedish, who are neutral, actually secretly asked the UK to send them radar so they could see what these things going on. They thought the Russians were launching old Nazi wonder weapons, V-1 weapons. And that turned out to be not true. No one ever really found out where these ghost rockets came from. A Swedish pilot flew beside one, and his description describes exactly a Tomahawk missile, that was, developed in the 1980s. So what I'm saying is no one ever came forward and said, I worked on the scare ships. We were Germans. We were this. No one ever came forward in 1931 and said, yeah, I was part of the Ghost Flyers. We were, flying airplanes off an aircraft carrier somewhere. No one ever came forward in 1946 said, I worked for, the Ghost Rockets and so on and so forth. You could not keep these things secret because they would have to be so huge. The logistics would have to be so huge that there'd be one person there who would somehow tell their grandparents, write a letter, go to a newspaper, but no one ever does that. So that's what I'm saying. These days, it's changed. People, you could be an inquirer. I mean, if you worked on UFOs at Area 51 today, don't you think that CNN, Fox, 60 Minutes would give you a couple $1 million to tell your story and to have proof behind it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It never happened?
Definitely. And these people that work there anyway, aren't they busting?
They're busting in the flown. Yeah, they're flown in like Janet Airlines. If you ever go to Vegas, when you get off the plane, McLaren Airport, there's a little part of McLaren Airport. There's these very kind of small jet airliners with a red stripe on. They call them Janet Airlines, and they fly out every morning to Area 51, and then they go to other places in Nevada. All these places we're talking about, Area 52, 53. In quotes. And also for the people who don't like to fly, there's actually a bus that will leave Vegas Monday morning to drive you out there if you don't like to fly. So stuff is going on out there, but there's no evidence that has anything to do with extraterrestrials. It basically has to do with secret aircraft, secret, probably hypersonic aircraft. And Mike, you were saying, that when you went to Edwards Air Force Base during that time, what would happen is they were flying something in and out of Area 51 that was so powerful that it would set off the seismographs in Los Angeles along the San Andreas Fault. Okay, now think about that. An airplane actually, turning on earthquake monitoring equipment. They probably have at Area 51, and they've had it for years, something close to the SS-71, but it's a hypersonic aircraft and probably it's a mothership and a smaller ship, something that can go 5,000-6,000 miles an hour, which is obviously really, really fast. It's probably a spy ship. We don't know, but there's more evidence that they're testing something like that in that area in the Nevada desert than re-engineering UFOs. Yeah.
Well, I can believe that because look at Concorde. Concorde was way before its time. And look at the speeds that went for those days. My boys were little. They're nearly 40 now. And we used to watch Concorde going over our house.
Right, and it wasn't fiscally viable. I mean, that's what it cost too much to run.
Yeah.
Right. Once again, would we?
It was beautiful up in the air. Absolutely beautiful.
Well, I know people rode on it. I know someone who was a travel agent. When it first came out, they actually gave travel agents a free ride on it. He says it was spectacular. It was like 3 hours from New York to London. It was great, but it was technology before its time. It cost a lot to fly, and people didn't want sonic booms anymore. So,
no, that's true. That's true. Very true. Yeah. So, back on ghosts.
Ghosts in the paranormal. Well, did you have a question, Irene?
No, carry on.
Okay. Well, in the research that you were doing, especially for the new book, I mean, is there any particular haunted case that you looked into or read about that really intrigued you?
Yeah, there's actually a number of them, and the one I don't know that sticks with me for some reason is we live in Massachusetts, and we go through the book and we have monsters and strange stories from every state. Okay, from the 50 states in the United States, and the one from New Hampshire is just the simple story about a woman who moves into a new place in Rochester, New Hampshire, a nice small town, New England town, and she's living there. She gets to know her neighbors. She goes out one night with some friends. They go to a club. And there's a guy who just stands up, plays the saxophone. It kind of sticks in her head. She goes home, and at 3 o'clock that morning, she hears someone playing the saxophone. She looks out her window, and there's a guy on her neighbor's lawn playing the saxophone. And she thought, wow, isn't this unusual? You know, we saw this earlier tonight. Now I'm seeing this guy. Who is he? Who knows, right? So the next day she calls her neighbor, and she says, hey, did you see that guy out there, you know, playing the saxophone at 3 in the morning? And the neighbor's stunned. And she tells the story that, you know, her brother was a saxophone player who had died years before. And from the description of the person who had just moved in, it matched her brother, you know, exactly. So I don't know, maybe because it's in my neighborhood, you know, that, you know, kind of sticks with me. That's just kind of a haunting story to me. And there's like 49 others in the book.
I love saxophone music. Absolutely love it.
Well, being there in Massachusetts too, I'm sure you've heard of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
What they call. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We were going to do a live remote from there once, you know, for our show, because we're probably about an hour and 15 minutes from there. Mm-hmm. But the logistics just wouldn't work, you know. But we've looked into it, and you know, that place is so crazy that people have seen like pterodactyls, dinosaur birds flying over that place. There's been a lot of murders there, a lot of ghosts, a lot of UFO activity. It's one of these hotspots, so we talk about a lot on our show. I'm sure you do too, where it just seems like all this kind of paranormal craziness is, you know, it is concentrated in this one area. Bridgewater Triangle certainly is one of them. St. Louis Valley out in Colorado is another one. It's just fascinating in a way. Why there?
You know, there's a couple of other locations more isolated, or I should say concentrated, that seem to have a lot of activity. Mm-hmm. But of course, you have to take the evidence as it's being told. There's of course the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, which George Knapp, of course, wrote the book on. Right. There's also John Edmonds' ranch, the Stardust Ranch, outside of Phoenix, where he has supposedly been dealing with a lot of stuff there at that ranch for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So. True. You say why there? You know what I mean? Why there? Why Bridgewater? Why Roslyn? You know, why? What makes these places different from everywhere else to be hotspots? Well, and that's something that we as researchers, I mean, Irene and I do a lot of talking about these kind of locations and trying to figure them out. What is special about them? What causes it? Like Irene, at your house, of course, you claim that there's it intersects several ley lines come through your area.
Ley lines, yeah. Ley lines are very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, my house is built on ley lines. Mm-hmm. Very, very active house. Right,
yeah. I mean, I didn't know about ley lines until one day, I don't know, somehow I saw a map of the UK, and they said these are ley lines. And, I mean, if you look at it, you have to admit that that's very strange, because there's these straight lines that go everywhere in the UK, and that's where all the roads are, that's where the hotspots are, that's where all the strange stuff happens.
Yeah, and that's where places like Stonehenge and all the henges are all link up. They're all along, and churches, cathedrals.
Mm-hmm. You know, why there? You know what I mean? I always get back to this. Why there and why not here? You know, something I believe too, you know, it's probably another show, but I believe that something happened on this earth about 12,500 years ago. There's a lot of evidence that people who lived back then knew more than we give them credit for. I mean, just look at how Stonehenge, you know, you can have all kinds of explanations how they built that. But basically you have cavemen moving monoliths that we would have a hard time moving now. There's places down in South America, in Turkey, where they're up in these mountains and they're made of these massive blocks of stone, cut stone. Yeah. You know, basically back in caveman days. How did they do that?
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar?
Perfect precision. The cutting is perfect precision.
Yep. Are you familiar with Brian Forster?
Yes, we had him on the show about 2 months ago.
Great gentleman.
He's the best.
I watch his videos. I love his take on it, because he's not trying to sensationalize it, but he's just pointing out straight facts with these locations like Göbekli Tepe, or even down in Pumapunku and Tiahuanaco, with these blocks being cut with laser precision. It shows that they were built with tools, with machining, and the machining is precision.
So you can't even put a piece of typing paper between the spaces between the blocks.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't do that now. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe you could, but you'd spend millions of dollars doing it. Well, I mean, how did they do this? And these things are up, they're up like a mile and a half on mountains and stuff. How do you lift a 400-ton piece of rock to get it on top of a mountain? You couldn't do it today, but they did it.
Yep, which is why I believe, and I think you were just kind of hinting at it, and that all of our histories, and you go back to the Judeo-Christian Bible or other stories from ancient cultures around the world. Almost every culture around the world has a flood myth. They have or a story about the world being destroyed and then starting over again. And I do believe that these are all based on a history of some kind where there was a natural disaster of some kind that basically wiped everything out, and we had to start over. And in that time of starting over, and I believe humankind was a lot more advanced than we are today.
Well,
but,
there's something, and not to interrupt you, but something happened, you're right, in about 12,000 years ago, let's say that, right?
12,600 years ago, around that time, yeah.
And the people before that, I mean, they could be humans, they could be people who were stranded here, but they were kind of lost, and they used the last of their technology to try to send out messages, let's say. Okay, so you have Easter Island, you have the pyramids, you have the pyramids in South America. I mean, people in South America and people in Egypt, were they in contact with each other? Well, they built pyramids almost exactly the same. Okay, how were they able to do that? There's a lot of evidence that the Sphinx has been there thousands of years before the pyramid.
Yeah, with the water erosion on the walls that they found.
There's a doctor at BU who's done a lot of research on that. You don't want to, and you have the scientific kind of blue wall against you, where if you want to be a scientist, you have to go and get grant money, and no one's going to give you grant money to determine whether there are UFOs involved in pyramid building. You're going to go look at something else, something that's nice, and you can put it in a box and so on and so forth. And so that's why there's a stigmatism among scientists to try to get money to really look at the UFO problem or whatever, in a scientific way. It's the same thing with military pilots and airline pilots. We say this all the time on our show. Military pilots are our best witnesses of UFOs, okay? Because airline pilots are 1A, because they're up there so often. They see things. They know what Venus looks like in the daytime. They know what the reflection of oil rigs look like off of the clouds out in the Gulf of Mexico. When they see something they can't identify, that's a UFO. That's a UFO. And if we can only say to people, especially military people, if you've been threatened before, with a lot of people call us and they say, I saw something while I was in the military, but higher ups told me don't say anything about it or you'll lose your pension. We say give those people amnesty. Let them go out and talk. Let them be free of this fear of something happening to them if they talk about what they've seen. Now, I'm talking about the 50s and 60s, not now. Think about the tidal wave of information, of research we could do listening to what these people actually saw.
Oh, absolutely. There's just so much information that can be available out there, but there's a lot of it that's suppressed. Society suppresses it. They don't want to upset the apple cart because of whether it's religion or politics or, even just dogma.
Well, we know the U.S. military, has gone out of their way to suppress information about UFOs. We know that. Because there's just so many instances of people who said they've seen something. My older brother, who I told you was in Vietnam. Before he went to Vietnam, he was at an airbase in Charleston, South Carolina, and they used to work on the airplanes in the middle of the night because it was too hot during the day. He says, we were out working, this is in the late 60s, we're out working on an F-4 Phantom one night, and this thing came right out of the sky, just a really bright saucer-shaped thing, and came right down. It was hovering about 100 feet above he and his mechanic crew who were working on this F-4 Phantom, and it stayed there for 2 or 3 minutes. It flew away. He says, the biggest mistake I made in my life is I reported it to higher authority. They put he and the 3 other guys in separate rooms. And they didn't beat them. They didn't, drug them or anything. They fed them and so on, but they isolated them. And people would come in every day asking the same questions over and over and over and over until after 4 or 5 days of this, you say, I'll say anything. And they made them sign an affidavit saying that what they saw was a re-entry vehicle from Cape Canaveral. Okay, that's right for my brother, someone who is so down to earth, there's no way in the world that he would go off on a flight of fancy with UFOs. Okay, that happened. They have gone out of their way to, once again, distract people, to threaten people not to talk about UFOs. We know that. There's a lot of evidence for that. But I think it's in their search to try to figure out what they are. I don't think that they know what they are. I think they know they're out there, a lot of evidence. And they don't want anyone else talking about, because we pay them almost $1 trillion a year in the United States for our defense budget. And they don't want to have that day where there's a general at a press conference saying, about UFOs, you're getting all this money, are they a threat to our security? And for them to say, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's easier to deny they exist than to say, yes, yeah, we don't know what they are. Yeah, right. I notice History Channel is coming out with a new series. I don't know if you've seen this coming up, based on Project Blue Book. And they even have an actor playing Dr. J. Allen Hynek. In the episode. Who's the guy?
Now, there's someone, not to interrupt you, but there's someone should do a movie or a book about. He's a very interesting guy, and they employ the U.S. Air Force, to squelch these things, and then he leaves the Air Force and he becomes a proponent of it. That's the kind of guy you have to listen to.
Well, he's the main character in this new seseries. And
that's great.
I'm the one guy who he's played by an actor. He was in Game of Thrones, and. Okay. It looks, the reviews I've seen, it looks pretty good. I think it's coming out in January, so I'll be interested to see the take on it and how they do it. Now, again, History is also, the channel does Ancient Aliens, which
right, yes, it's terrible, and any of those Bigfoot shows and stuff like that, I can't watch them because it's like, wow, you're not doing it right. You have to go about these things in a scientific way. That's the only way we're going to figure out what's going on.
Oh, come on. Now, don't put down my mountain monsters.
No, you can't.
I mean, that is my guilty pleasure, hoot and holler, show that I can sit back and just laugh and laugh and laugh.
Yeah, well, that's what it's good for, especially when they went out. And didn't they leave like a plate of 20 hamburgers or something? And, the next day they're all gone. It's like... I wish that the time and the effort, I've been approached to be on these shows, and it was just like, I was approached where I'd get 5 days and nights free in Las Vegas. And believe me, if you knew me, that's like going to heaven. All right. And I just couldn't do it because they wanted me to be the tour guide on a bus that would bring a bunch of tourists up to the gate of Area 51. And what am I going to say? And my editor at Berkeley Books at the time said, don't do it because it's there's a history of them making fun of people like that, and you'll never outlive it.
Yeah.
You should take that time, the effort, the money, the energy, and look into these things in a scientific way. That's the only way we're going to find out what happens. And all this stuff, just to put a period at the end of the sentence, all these books about Roswell and the U.S. government killing people to shut them up and so on and so forth. That's all noise. There's so many UFOs reported around the world every month. 1,000 UFOs reported around the world every month. 90% of them can be explained, but that 10% can't be explained. We have to concentrate on that 10%. You can't concentrate on the 90% that is noise. You have to concentrate on that 10%. Look in on that like Hynek would do, like other people, like John Keel would do. Look at it from a scientific way, block out all the noise, and maybe at some point we're going to find out what's going on. Something's going on. We just don't know what it is.
And what's going on in our research is a lot stranger, in my opinion, than most people realize.
Right. Yes.
We are trained from childbirth, to believe a reality works in a certain way. Even when we're talking about, physics and history and all these things that we're taught in school growing up, and what science tries to tell us today. And again, I agree with you. I think things need to be looked at scientifically. And at the same time, the problem we have with science is it won't research certain things because of that stigma involved, right, or the suppression, the pressure to leave it alone. So right, there are things that are happening, and we look at a lot of cases like, say, ghosts. Okay, one of the things that we're realizing is what some people consider to be ghosts. We're starting to think maybe having more to do with types of time slips, or fabric of the space-time, getting all wonky, and you're seeing a past event, rather like a person who you walk in a room and there's a person in a World War II uniform walking around. Well, you're seeing a ghost, or are you seeing a person alive in their time period wearing their uniform?
There's a perfect picture. And once again, I'm glad to hear you say this, because we talk about this all the time on our show. All right, it's kind of like the unified field theory of the paranormal. This idea that ghosts and the Loch Ness Monster and UFOs and cryptids and everything, that they're all part of the same thing. Okay, how cool would that be? That they're all part of the same thing. And if we could only kind of, like Einstein was always kind of looking for the unified field theory, if only we could find out, wow, this is what's happening. And as you say, time slips, different dimensions. They don't have to be little green men from Mars. There's a great photo from California about a year ago where a guy, he just went to this place that he heard was haunted, a barn. So he sets up his camera and he takes a picture of the barn. And sure enough, you can see some kind of a figure in the window, but above the barn, there's a UFO. And it's like, wow, what are the chances this guy's going to be there, taking a picture and get both a ghost and a UFO? It almost leads you to think they got to be connected.
They have got to be connected. Who was it? It was someone wrote a book, UFOs Above, Ghosts Below.
Oh, that was Barry Taft. Dr. Barry Taft wrote that.
Yeah.
That might be just kind of like the first little bit of the explanation. And real quick, I'll just tell the story that I always tell people is that when I worked for General Electric, I used to take the train from Albany to New York City a lot. And you go along the Hudson River, the entire ride down, 3.5 hours. And as you're going along the river, you will see that I know it's going to sound crazy, but you will see these long streams of water going out onto the Hudson River. And what it is, it's the ducks. The ducks are right along the shore, and when they hear the train coming, they get upset, and they fly out over the river, and you can see that all the way down. The duck has no idea what a train is. It has no idea that people are in a train. It's going from Albany to west. All they know is they see it, it upsets them, they try to get away. Well, maybe that's the same way with UFOs. People think UFOs hide from us, but they don't. People see them all the time. Look at the Hudson Valley sightings. Thousands of people saw these huge UFOs over the Hudson River. And it happens all around the world, and it's been happening for years. Maybe it's something that we just can't understand. Just like the dog barking at the ghost in the corner. We can't understand that. Maybe that's what's going on. We're just not prepared mentally or physically to understand what's really going on.
Well, you mentioned like in the Bridgewater Triangle where people see pterodactyls, and you hear stories of people seeing these ancient animals, or even anachronistic animals or creatures that we have no idea what the hell they are. And are we seeing, again, is it that they're hiding in the woods and we just haven't found them yet, or are we seeing I don't know, eddies in reality, things happening in the twisting of time and space and reality that's causing an overlap, that we're seeing past events, past creatures? Because, even in string theory and in other types of physics, they're talking about the idea of all time happening at once. And with that it's only our perception of it that time is linear. It's the only way our brains can process the information.
Right. Yes, right. How can once again, I'll say, maybe it's something just like the duck can't understand what a train is. Maybe we can't understand what UFOs are, and maybe we'll never be able to understand it. It's just another layer of consciousness above us that we're not privy to.
Well, and then when we think about death, we think about ghosts or spirits and people who have had past life communications or interactions. I mean, hell, as a researcher, I've never seen a ghost, but I've recorded the EVPs. I've recorded voices, and I've heard voices in empty rooms when nobody else is there but me, and strange whistling, strange sounds and things that happen, footsteps right in front of me on the floor, and there's nobody there.
Right.
So,
I mean, the whole idea for it was funny because when I was looking for like the title for this book, Mac Maloney's Haunted Universe, well, what does that mean in a way, right? I was watching a documentary probably about a year ago now where they're talking about how astrophysicists these days think that we're in a multiverse, that the universe we're in is just one of an infinite number of universes where everything is the same, except there might be one more grain of sand on the beach. There might be one more star in the sky or whatever. And I just thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if in all these other universes, everything goes right? There are no ghosts. There's no Loch Ness Monster. There's no UFOs. There's no things going bump in the night. Maybe in those other universes, everything is just non-paranormal, and we live in the haunted universe, and that's how I came up with the title. Strange things happen in our reality all the time, and because the media makes fun of them, or people are afraid to tell other people that they've seen this thing. There's a stigma, as we were talking about earlier, attached to this. But let's face it, strange things happen to all of us all the time here. Why? Who knows?
Who knows? No one knows. I often wonder if aliens have ghosts,
Well, once again, people think what I say is they don't have to be little green men from Mars. There's a good chance. We looked at, when I did UFOs a long time, and I realized that, especially the Foo Fighters in World War II, what they would do is these flying saucers, light glow, what orbs would show up off the wings of British bombers, bombing German cities in the middle of the night. They're not shooting at our bombers. They're not shooting at the Germans. They're just there observing. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if they were time tourists? They're just someone in a far future able to come back and watch history as it's being made. They're just observing us.
Yeah.
Which is another odd thing, too. I mean, in all the stories in UFOs in wartime that I did, and there's about 250 stories in that, little anecdotes in that book too. There's 3 where UFOs actually fired on people, actually showed some kind of, hostile intent. The vast majority of them they're just there observing us. And, what better way would, you go on a safari, you go on one of those buses, you see the lion eat the antelope. The lion doesn't know what we're doing. The antelope certainly doesn't know what they're doing. We're looking in on nature. Maybe that's the same thing with us. UFOs are looking in on us, watching history being made.
What's funny about that is there's a famous quip from Dr. Stephen Hawking before he passed away. When somebody asked him about time travel, if it was possible, and he goes, well, if time travel was possible, then where are all the tourists? And
right. Wasn't that funny that he said that? And someone said to me, I was on another show, and they said, well, why wasn't there, 5 million people at the crucifixion? We don't know. You don't know. I mean, someone said to me, I'd go back and watch a Shakespeare play. Someone else said, I'd go back and watch the Battle of Troy. Well, why aren't all these people there? We don't know why. Okay, but there's a lot of, to me, there's a lot of kind of evidence of something pointing towards that UFOs are just looking in on us. They're not hiding from us because they're around all the time. They're just looking in and watching us. And people always think, well, they're aliens making sure we don't go out of control with nuclear weapons. So we're already out of control.
No, I've often thought that they were observing us, just observing and learning from us. Maybe on their own planet or something, they're having a history lesson or something. Okay, we just go. It's part of all of it.
Right. Yeah, just like someone goes on a safari and watches.
Yeah, or like us going on a school trip to the Battle of Hastings, where the battle took place.
Well, it's also like if you go back to, in the Bible, into Genesis, and even in the apocryphal book of Enoch, where they talk about the Watchers. There were the Watchers who watched humanity, and maybe that's who these UFOs are. Maybe they are these Watchers, and what do they seem to be doing? A lot of observing.
Right.
Looking in my front room window, that's what they're doing, I tell you.
It's interesting because during World War II with the Foo Fighters, where the Allies, the American and the British, were convinced they were Nazi super weapons.
Yeah.
But the Nazis ran into them too, and they were convinced that they were our super weapons. And when the war was over and we went into Germany, no one found any kind of factories. That's what drives me crazy. When people go out and they say, Germany had UFOs, they were in contact with planets, and they had a planet 4 light years from Earth, and they had a secret base in Antarctica. And I think if they had all this help, extraterrestrial help, why would you lose the war? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of disrespecting the people who actually kind of fought the war, So this idea that I'm convinced, this idea that, as you say, they're watching us, but not to steer us in any direction or whatever. They're just there watching us like tourists, just want to see history being made.
Well, on that note, unfortunately, we are running out of time here. This has been a great show, Mac. Time has really been flying. So, real quickly, where can people find your new book, Mac Maloney's Haunted Universe?
Well, it's on sale everywhere. The best place to get it is on Amazon.com, and my publisher wants me to say BarnesandNoble.com too. But Amazon.com, Mac Maloney's Haunted Universe. You order it today; it'll be on your, in your mailbox tomorrow.
And of course, just a reminder that Mac Maloney's Military X-Files also airs every Friday night at 10 p.m. here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
We love that.
That's
We
right.
love talking to people in the UK because, as you can tell from the past 2 hours, we're really in love with talking about hauntings and strange things happening in the UK. It's a real fertile ground for this stuff.
Yeah, and I must apologise for the paranormal noises going on in the background here. I'm sorry about that, Mac.
Just adds to the atmosphere.
Yep.
Well, the parrot will be adding to the oven in a minute if he carries on.
Well, Mac, thanks again for coming on the show tonight. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for having us on the network. We really appreciate it.
We love having you on. And want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in for another edition of Paranormal UK Radio. And don't forget that we're on every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And if you miss an episode, where can we be found, Irene?
Well, on a Monday night on Dark Matter Digital and just about everywhere else.
Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, you name it, you can find our
radio, TalkStream Live, Oh, we're there.
All right, well, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great evening. Irene, we'll catch you next week.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.